Well, hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Hygienic Design Risk Management, Industry Challenges and Global Insights. And I'm Adrienne Bloom, Editorial Director of Food Safety Magazine, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. So thanks for joining us. Now, today's presenters on our webinar are Bob Ferguson, President of Strategic Consulting, and Dr. Patrick Wouters, Global Hygienic Design Lead of Food Safety, Quality, and Regulatory at Cargill. So I'll rejoin the presenters at the end to help answer your questions that come in throughout the webinar. So don't forget to submit those using the Q&A and chat section of your webinar console. And today's event is also being recorded and it'll be archived on food-safety.com.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. It's good to be here to talk to you today. I apologize for not being on camera, but sometimes technology cooperates and sometimes it does not. So this morning, we had a little bit of an issue, but I think that's going to be just fine. I'm glad, though, that we are here speaking about hygienic design, and what I'm going to say is it's related discipline and sanitation. And I think these are both skills that work together, that act together, that are completely fundamental for food safety. Because of this importance, we wanted to find out more about how processors are dealing with these challenges, particularly of hygienic design, and again, how it follows on to food safety. So what we did is earlier this year, as we do routinely with the Food Safety Insights program, is we conducted a survey of the readership. And between surveys and interviews, we got contact with 118 food processors in 23 countries. And what we wanted to hear was their real life issues and challenges with hygienic design. So what you're going to hear me summarize this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are, is these interviews and what we found and what their major challenges were. You can see all of the details in the April-May issue of Food Safety Magazine, or also the June-July issue for part 2 of the article, which is the current issue out right now. And you can see what they also said about sanitation. But today we're going to focus mainly on their comments that they had for their hygienic design. And what I'm going to do here is summarize what I see as the major themes that came out. There was a lot of things that we learned, a lot of details that people wanted to share about their particular issues and challenges, but there were several themes that came out that I want to go through, and then I can turn it over to Patrick once we have these themes, and Patrick can help talk about some of the principles of hygienic design and also perhaps how he's dealing with those as well. So I wanted to go through this. The first comment here, and I'm not going to read each one of the comments, but these are essentially the comments we heard in interviews while doing this work. The first one I found was very interesting because it came from a food safety inspector, a state inspector in a Midwest state. And I like this idea because the perspective he has as an inspector, he gets to see a lot of different plants all across the state, not necessarily just working in one area or one food processing vertical, but he sees a lot of things. And you'll see the comments here. He said, overall, a lot of the food processing equipment he sees is poorly designed and difficult to assemble and disassemble. I'm going to come back to that in a second, this theme of assembly and disassembly. But what I didn't include in his comments here is he mentioned things like plastic belting. Sometimes it's very hard to remove and clean, and that always caused a problem when you would see that. He mentioned pumps as being a particular area, hard to clean, hard or difficult to impossible to disassemble or reassemble. And like I said, that theme is going to come out quite a bit, this idea of the equipment and the ability to disassemble and reassemble it for cleaning. One of the things that we saw in the survey, and you'll see in the article, is 1 in 4 respondents, 25% of the respondents cited that equipment disassembly and reassembly was their #1 challenge. And it was either things such as being able to reach the equipment, being able to disassemble the process, particularly with pumps and things like that, the product, and exactly how they were going to go about doing that. The other thing that we're going to talk about a little bit in just a minute is getting people to do that correctly. And what you'll hear people tell us is the harder it is to disassemble and reassemble something, the less likely is someone's going to do it with diligence and accuracy. But this inspector also mentioned some other areas that we'll discuss, things like dead ends, seams and welds, and equipment age. So he saw a lot of this, and you'll see towards the end of the comment that he mentioned, why can't all this equipment be standard or more similar to what you see in dairy, which is much more regulated. The other thing that came across here is hygienic design of the equipment in one thing, but the hygienic design goes in lockstep with the buildings itself. And I picked out this one simply because it really jumped out. This one person said, our building's almost 100 years old, and it proves to make some things difficult. I'm assuming that he's underestimating that a bit, or saying that it's difficult. One of the other things that he mentioned when I interviewed him was they also have dairy brick in the floor because the building is so old. And I'm assuming most people are familiar with what dairy brick is, but they're the 6-inch by 6-inch red brick tiles with mortar and lots of seams and lots of places for harborage sites, which has to be difficult to clean and maintain. But this is one of the issues that he said about the building. They've been in operation for a really long time, which also caused other problems. We specifically asked the question if people had policies for replacement equipment. Many of the experts I spoke to when I was designing the survey said, one of the things you have to be careful with hygienic equipment or hygienic design and equipment is make sure that if you're moving equipment from one plant to another, oftentimes people do that for economical and budget reasons. Let's make sure that we're not taking somebody else's problem and a piece of equipment that caused them problem in another location and bringing it to our location. So we asked people if they had a policy, and a majority of people said they did have a policy as far as bringing old equipment on, but this is the opportunity, most people said, to fix things like dead ends, threads and problems like that, or any other pieces of the equipment that can be modified while you're making that transition. They also mentioned that they usually have lots of pressure to get things done quickly, but again, this may be the last opportunity that people said that they had to make this change. The other thing that came out, again, loud and clear was this idea, not only of the building being old, but the layout on the floor, all a key piece of hygienic design and flow, and where the equipment is and how it operates within the building was also a key element. One of the stories that someone told me that came out was they had a piece of processing equipment that was back in the corner of the building, never caused any problems, was pretty easy to work with, was modern design, all the things that you would want. And then as they expanded their processing, they brought in 2 new pieces of equipment, and I'll say this, my words, engineers that didn't consider the impact on the hygienic design of what they were doing, put the equipment around the other equipment that was in there in the first place, and now made things like the pumps and the surface of the equipment hard to reach. So they went from having an ideal situation to someone not considering the design layout of the floor to having something that was very difficult. And we heard several instances like that. One other person mentioned that they have a conveyor. It was a beverage processor that has a conveyor that when they built out the building, somebody decided it was a good idea to run the conveyor through the walls of the building so that you couldn't actually get to the belt or the conveyor, which caused them problems. So these type of things, considerations for the building itself surrounding the equipment. And again, I've mentioned this a few times, but this came out loud and clear. The last one here, this idea of accessibility. When equipment is hard to access and disassemble, people don't really want to do the work. And this is one of the ones, and the next slide I'm going to go into this a little bit further, but this is one of the areas that came out of the design of the equipment and the impact of employees. The employees that work on the equipment, do the assembly and disassembly and assembly and cleaning, do the sanitation, are a key element of this. And this idea of looking at real life and saying, if it's hard to do, someone's going to find a way to cut corners. Someone's going to find a way to not do it as diligently as they could. One of the other survey questions we ask is, are you able to keep up with your maintenance and able to keep up with your equipment maintenance and the work you have to do? And at least 40% of the respondents said they have at least some difficulty in keeping up with maintenance, either because of time pressure or issues like this, making it hard and doing it the right way. So this was definitely an issue. But this idea that employees play a key role in this may sound simple, but there was a lot of people that mentioned this in different aspects of this. Okay, if it's difficult, they're not going to want to do the work, like I mentioned. The other thing is finding skilled employees, not just people who can do the work, but also people who can do the work with with the hygiene and sanitation and the understanding of what they have to do from a food safety standpoint being as part of their skill and part of their work. So this person here really said what we heard several times is, we have no shortage of applicants. We have no shortage of people coming looking for a job. What we do have is a shortage of the right person with the food safety skill set. So that's something to be very cognizant of, is making sure, what's the old adage, not only having the right people, but having them in the right seats. The other one that came out, and this is in the first article in April and May that I found not only poignant, but a little bit humorous. One of the questions I asked was, one of the biggest issues do you have? And this person said, I have a really hard time finding people who can do sanitary welding. He said, one of my big issues is sanitary welds. My second biggest issue is sanitary welds, and he just kept going on. He said, this is a real difficult thing because, again, you can find welders, but not necessarily people who can do it in the right way to not cause cracks or make other problems and make it worse. So that was one of the key things, is this idea of people who are not only trained in what they're doing, but also the impact of the skill. And several people mentioned that this goes back to HR and senior management. And I'm going to say that this part of this has less to do with hygienic design and overall engineering type aspects, but this goes to food safety culture and what management and the rest of the team do. Several people mentioned that HR is looking to fill positions. They're seen as entry-level positions that don't require a lot of experience, education, certifications, but we all know that that's not the case, because they have to be cognizant of their impact on the overall sanitation and design process within the plant. And what he was finding is HR doesn't have, in his particular case, HR didn't have a view to what those impacts were, and we're hiring people that weren't really ready for those positions, or we're hiring people that didn't understand necessarily the impact on what they were doing. So this is where the entire team comes in, and lots of people mention this. So this idea of the equipment in the right place, making it so the employees can get to it, and having the right employees operating it, all came in. And these are the major themes that came out in our survey. And again, you can read this in the articles, and you'll get much more details and some of the charts and graphs of showing what people told us. But these are the key issues that we heard. And I want to ask a couple of questions about the key issues that you're seeing. And we have a poll we'd like to present here. What's your biggest hygienic design challenge, if you were going to answer this survey? These here, I put some of the ones I just mentioned, but pick one, tell us what your biggest issue was, and then we'll see what the audience has to say. So we're seeing some moving around here. The employee compliance, I like that one. The equipment itself with disassembly. I see that lack of a sanitation leader position. Several people brought that up on the surveys that we had as well. Most people said they had someone, but lots of people said they didn't necessarily have someone. Some of it was a team effort that people also mentioned. So this idea of the equipment, and I think that we can address that as we go forward, this idea of disassembly. So that's good information. We can see how everybody voted. We have another poll. I'm sorry, here's the answer. We just saw that come up. Let me go to the next one. If you had an experience a food safety incident that could be traced back to hygienic design, yes or no? Have you had that experience, or have you been spared that? So far, we've got everybody saying they've had some sort of incident. So 4-1 so far. I'm not surprised at that at all. One of the things I mentioned when we started was this Midwest inspector who came through and saw in a lot of plants that this is the case. So I'm not surprised, but it looks like we're at 70-30, something like that. So 70% of everybody's had some sort of incident with hygienic design. Okay, with that, thank you very much, and I will turn it over to Patrick, and he's going to talk about more of the details. I'm just going to turn it over to Patrick. There's our details, or our results. Patrick, it's all yours.
Yes, thank you, Bob, and great to have those insights. I really appreciate the efforts you did on this huge investigation, and it tells us again how important hygienic design is. What I would like to do next, before I go into all kinds of details, I also like to continue with a poll. And my question is the following. To what extent are EHEAD's guidelines currently applied within your organization or projects? So I'd like to get a bit of an idea how familiar you are with the EHEAD's organization that I will talk about. And yeah, just to get a good understanding. I see people start to provide some feedback. I would say we are a very easily, or how do you say that, very nicely divided here. Good to know. Great to see that people are using them. And it also provides an opportunity for the ones that have not used them yet to show what this can mean for you. So thanks for filling in the poll. I'm going to close the poll, and I thank you again for filling it in. So these are the results. Good to know. So what I would like to do next is to provide you with a quick introduction of the EHEAD's organization, so you're at least familiar what this organization is about. And then I'd like to explain to you one of our guidelines that we have written. And it's all about hygienic design risk management. And I'd like to finish off with some examples of how do we go about that. I already got a nice introduction from Adrienne, so I will not pay here a lot of time, but if you like to look back, this is where I come from and what I've done in the past. So let us continue with the EHEAD's organization. The EHEAD's organization stands for the European Hygienic Engineering and Design Group, and it is a non-for-profit organization consisting of all kinds of stakeholders in the food industry. And our objective is really to get together and to form a good discussion platform where we are independently of our interest really discussing what is hygienic design and how can we promote this for the food industry. So it is bringing together those equipment suppliers, those people that are participating in constructing or delivering components to a hygienic design building, and bring together the food producers and really discuss together with the service providers, with universities on how can we do things better. Now, this is not only to manage food safety, which is of course very important, but we also have a clear emphasis on preventing any quality incidents. At the same time, we are looking for efficiency as well as sustainable operations, and we believe that hygienic design can contribute to this immensely. Now, I mentioned European. We are based in Europe. We are having our headquarters in the Netherlands, but we are scattered around the globe, and we are very proud of being present in many countries or regions. There are also white spaces, and if you are in one of those white spaces and you would like to set up something in your country, or you have an interest in hygienic engineering and design, I encourage you to get in touch. Later on, I will provide you with some contact details, and for sure, we like to get to know you. Now, the organization develops guidance for the food industry, for the suppliers of equipment, but also for the end users. And we have written close to 60 guideline documents, and I will explain later the topics that we cover. Then we also provide training and education. So we provide trainings done by authorized trainers to bring you up to speed with all the knowledge. And next to that, we also have a equipment certification program. And the whole idea of this equipment certification program is that we perform of the equipment a hygienic design evaluation. We test equipment for its cleanability, and this gives you assurance that the equipment is actually fit for purpose and complies to hygienic design criteria. I mentioned that we write guidelines. We have many working groups, all consisting of volunteers that have a joint vision and a joint willingness to share their knowledge and to work on establishing, okay, what is hygienic design? What is hygienic factory design looks like? What is equipment design looks like? We have all kinds of different equipment used both in dry processing as well as in wet processing, open equipment, closed equipment, all with their specifics, as well as packaging machines or complete production lines for which we write guidance documents. Now, Bob mentioned hygienic welding as one of the issues found in his survey. As EHATS, we do have a guideline on hygienic welding, as well as how do you test that a weld is actually hygienically done. So I can only recommend to have a look at some of the things that have been written. Now, we as an organization have a website. I can encourage you to also sign up for our LinkedIn notifications. So please get in touch. So hygienic design is all about product safety management. And as Bob mentioned, this has been recognized already by the food industry. But what is actually also interesting to know is that the European Food Safety Authority, the EFSA, they published in 2024 a scientific opinion. They did all kinds of root cause analysis to incidents that were caused by microbes, and in particular food safety concerning microbes like Listeria and Salmonella. And what they discovered is that actually the majority of the root causes were actually related to the building, so zoning and hygiene barriers inside the building, as well as cleaning and disinfection practices and hygienic design. Hygienic design of the equipment that is used in food production. Now, the authorities have recognized this. Also, the GFSI organization has recognized this already a number of years ago. And I don't know how familiar you are with the GFSI organization, but I have taken the opportunity to put in a, I call it our food safety standards pyramid that we created. And the GFSI organization is basically an industry-owned initiative, and they are establishing benchmarking requirements for all our existing food safety management programs. And I have listed here some of our well-known certification program owners. Actually, it is certification program owners. And I have listed here some key ones. In total, there are about 12. Some are more regionally organized. Some have a specific focus on the farm to fork supply chain. And those organizations are being audited, or their programs are being audited by certain certification bodies, and I've also listed a couple of those in the slide. Now, what is important to realize is that the GFSI organization published 2 new benchmarking requirements called J1 and J2. They are both voluntary, but their objective of the GFSI and the objective of those benchmarking standards is that we better describe what food safety management programs should think about when they when we want to manage food safety by design. Now, I've listed here a couple of requirements that have been incorporated in the benchmarking requirements. And what we see now happening is that certain certification program owners start to incorporate some of those voluntary benchmarking requirements into their global standards. I'd like to highlight that for J1 is a complete new area. That is about the future, let me say it, future certification of suppliers of processing equipment or suppliers of food building components or other service providers into the food industry. Now, for this benchmarking area, there is currently no certification program yet, but this may happen in the future. But for J2, we see that the certification program owners started to incorporate this into their programs. Now, what the EHATS has done, the EHATS has written a white paper to explain the benchmarking requirements from the GFSI in more detail. So we provide, let's say, answers to some statements made and how both the certification program owners can use this as well as the future to be audited organizations. I like to also mention that the FSSC organization, they also have written a guidance document regarding equipment management, and the FSSC organization also start to refer to the EHATS white paper on how do you go about certain benchmarking requirements. Now, one of the benchmarking requirements is that there is more emphasis on performing a hygienic design risk management. In particular, when you are purchasing new equipment. And but of course, we are not only looking for new equipment or new buildings, we are also looking for legacy. So what we are aiming with this guideline is to provide, let's say, a systematic approach on how do you perform now a hygienic design risk management, both from a user perspective, so a food producer perspective, as well as from a supplier perspective. Now, and I mentioned let's say the food safety management program owners are focusing initially on new, but of course this approach can also be used for legacy situations. Now, how does this hygienic design risk management approach look like in a nutshell? And actually, there will not be a lot of surprises because we have used and compared other risk assessment and risk management models. But most important step is first of all to understand your scope and context and criteria. Then we also highlight the importance of using a multidisciplinary team. So getting together engineers, food safety managers or food safety responsible persons in your plant, as well as operations, so that you have together this, and you know, this is not the complete team. You can also think about maintenance engineers or project engineers or you name it, but it is important to have this cross-functional, cross-discipline view on the situation. Now, together you perform your hygienic design risk assessment. And what we highlight is the importance of taking the whole life cycle into context. So when you're doing maintenance, when you're doing cleaning, is your design fit for purpose for those activities as well as operations? Now, then that comes to setting your design requirements. Then when you have established your design requirements, your user requirement specifications, then it becomes on reviewing all the technical drawings and making sure that everything is in compliance with what you were planning or what you want to see happening. And what we also like to highlight is the importance of then design is one element, but you also need to think about your operational procedures and practices, like cleaning and like maintenance. Now, as a refresher, I have put into the deck a slide just to remind you about the food safety hazards that we try to manage by hygienic design. So it is biological, It is chemical as well as physical hazards that we try to manage. And all the time we are looking at how can we prevent those from getting into your process. So prevention of ingress. Then we are looking at the prevention of growth, especially relevant for the biological ones, but also for pests and other things that can grow. And how can we prevent accumulation? Because either in the process line or in your factory, we like to prevent either moisture or condensate or residues, allergen residues, or any other debris that potentially can cause us harm. So that are our hygienic design objectives. And we try to achieve that by applying the hygienic design principles. And it starts with selecting the right materials of construction. Then we are looking at the ability to clean. So how well are things designed to clean it? How well are things designed to be able to drain things off? How well can we segregate things? And how well can we access things? Now, Bob mentioned as well the accessibility as an important hygienic design feature to achieve. Now, for all those principles, the EHS has written criteria. And it goes now too far to go into all the details of the design criteria for each principle. And I encourage you to look at some of the guidance documents that we have written. Now, I mentioned a couple of times already, we're talking about hygienic building design. And this is basically a snapshot of showing you all the elements that play a role when we are looking at hygienic building design. And I have included here also the importance of air quality management, HVAC system designs, as well as cabling systems, which is also critical next to plant layout and all the architectural finishing aspects. Now, when it comes to equipment design, there are many other elements that are important, but I like to highlight some guidance here that the EHS has written on integration. And the hygienic integration is particularly relevant when we talk about proper hygienic design risk management and how do we integrate all the components in a hygienic way. And we have guidance written for that as well. So going back now to the guidance document on the hygienic design risk management, the guideline itself provides you with loads of details, loads of examples of how do you go through each step of the hygienic design risk management process and how do you do this in a systematic way. And one element that I like to pick out as well is the importance of doing this proactively. So the word design already mentions it. When you can design out risks, you prevent your reliance on procedures and practices, operator moods, or other things which are related to daily activities. So when you design things out, you make your life simpler. And I just put here a couple of examples, like, for example, we have a lot of issues regarding lubrication management. Now, the first way to think about is, can we design lubrication out? Now, when that is not possible and you need to have lubrication, then it comes to hygienic design principles application and making sure that the lubricant cannot get into the food product. Now, a similar example I like to provide here about the ability to drain. So when you want to avoid that water remains in your line and dilutes your product or provides there an opportunity during idle time for microbiological growth, it is better to have your whole line in a drainable position designed. Now, very important in hygienic design risk management is that that what you have designed is also verified, that you validate that it is actively working, and that you monitor things on a regular basis, and that you review everything on time, and that you make sure it is all fit for purpose. Now, this sounds like an open door and everything. Everybody will always say, of course, and that is a non-brainer. But I like to highlight it still, and also making sure that you record things and that you have, let's say, the evidence that when somebody asks you, why did you make that decision, that you can say, okay, that decision was based on this and this, for this and this reason, and that is why we went for it, and that is how we ensured that what we did is actually working. Now, the EHETS organization has written a couple of guidelines for this. I mentioned earlier the welding test methods and checking that your welding is done effectively. The other important one is the one on cleaning and cleaning validation, as cleaning is such an important aspect of maintaining hygiene in our food facilities, food manufacturing facilities. Now, the guideline itself consists of many more useful checklists that we created, and I encourage you to use them, both for risk identification purposes, but also for mitigation measures. And we also provided numerous examples. And I like to continue now with some examples. I will do it short, but you get a bit the idea. And the first example is shown on a picture. And most important when you do a hygienic design risk management, I mentioned it earlier, is to get a good understanding of the context, the scope, what are we reviewing. Now, I have written here, it is a lobe pump, and this lobe pump is used to pump tomato paste. Now, some of you may immediately recognize the brand of the pump. I won't mention that. Some of you may immediately recognize some elements that may not be completely appropriate. It can be related to the pump itself. It can be related to the way the pump is installed, the way it is located on the floor. But important is that you really understand, where is it used for how do I intend to clean this pump. Now, and then I come straight away to the word cleaning. So this pump actually, when you investigate this pump in more detail, you will actually recognize that this pump is not suitable for cleaning in place, which means that you need to dismantle this pump in order to clean it. And ideally, you should dismantle it and then put it back in place and then disinfect it, because during the reassembly you can always get cross-contamination. So the best method is to disinfect it again after you have reassembled it. Now so in a legacy situation, you need to understand the situation and see, okay, is there a SOP procedure written that actually describes that this pump needs to be disassembled before cleaning or for cleaning? And if that is not the case, then you know that there could be potentially issues. So this is an example of how you have to go about this. And like I mentioned before, this is a pump that is not suitable for cleaning in place and needs to be dismantled for cleaning. So I'd like to go to the next one, and this is a improved situation. So in this case, the pump has been certified according to the EHETS. It has been tested and shown to be cleanable in place, as well as this pump is installed in a drainable position. With a drain valve attached to it, and that's, let's say, a better situation. Now, I started to mention the EHEAD certification program. This is just to highlight that we have a certification program, both for equipment used for liquids as well as equipment used for dry cleaning. And there are different certificates available. And I encourage you to have a look at our website to obtain more understanding of the complete certification program. Now, then I like to finish off with an example of a building design. Building designs, of course, are much more complex with a lot of elements to think about. And in this example, it is about a room for a milk packaging line. And what I like to highlight again is that you have to have a good understanding of the scope, context, and criteria. And I provided here some examples of things that you need to think about when you are designing a room for a particular production process. And yeah, what is the relevance of that particular element? And then here there are some answers provided about the scope and the context. And when you have those answered, you are able to better define for each element that you need to define or to specify in your building design what you need to have. Now here again, the elements, examples of the contaminants, the mechanism of contamination, and the hygiene description, and in your case then the risk analysis of how important it is for your particular situation. And then when you have done all that, we encourage you to think about the hygienic design principles for each element and come up with decisions. Okay, yeah, what is important? How can I manage that in the best situation? And or in an existing situation, how is my situation and how do I need to improve? Now, I do realize that in EHEADS we are using 5 hygienic design principles. They are providing you with a good understanding of hygienic design. But yeah, it's always important that you continue thinking for your situation if you have missed anything in your design review. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I like to summary some of the key points that I addressed in my short presentation. Yeah, it's obvious that hygienic risk management is critical. But even more important, doing the right validation and making sure that what you designed is actually fit for purpose, being it in a legacy situation or being it in a new design situation. There's one other thing that I like to make some marketing efforts for. As EHEADS organization, we are also having various meetings, and I like to mention 2 dates, 2 important dates, one this year in November and one next year in October, where we bring together many experts in hygienic engineering and design. And if you want to learn things, if you want to engage with the network, I certainly can encourage you to participate in one of those events or any other events that may be organized in your region. That brings me to my next poll. And I've talked about legacy situations. I've talked about new facilities. I'd like to hear from you what you see as the main barrier in obtaining hygienic design. And what are you seeing as one of the issues? I see people are answering, and I see cost coming back, and that is no surprise. And I love to continue having a discussion about the cost. It's also management buy-in, and actually that was also something that Bob mentioned about our food safety culture, our willingness to think about longer term investments, and also the understanding of the importance of managing certain risks by design. Anyway, thanks again for providing all your feedback regarding this poll. Let's have a look at the results, meaning I'm closing the poll. Now, like it's very obvious results. Costs are seen as a main driver, which makes it difficult to comply with hygienic design standards. I can only say, when we talk about costs, if you don't have hygienic design, your costs will be way higher. So think about this when you want to design and manage food safety by design. Sometimes an investment will definitely pay you back, not only in preventing incidents, but also in operational efficiency, as well as downtime as a result of cleaning efforts. So keep that in mind when you are looking for investments, and really think about total cost of ownership as your way to sell your project. So that brings me to my last slide of this presentation, with some contact information. And I'd like to go to a final poll. And the final poll is for our next speaker.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for those great presentations, Bob and Patrick. And before we have our presenters address your questions, I'd like to remind you that we love your feedback. So please do take a few moments to complete our webinar survey, which you'll see also on the screen. All right, so looking at our questions coming in, we've got a lot of good ones. And I thought that some of the things that we discussed in the last poll prior to what you see on your screen that Patrick discussed were interesting. And I kind of want to address some of those topics in the first couple of questions for our speakers here. And I'd like to go back to Bob for a moment and pose a question to you, Bob. And this is something you alluded to in the poll that you did at the end there, Patrick. So the question, and Patrick, please feel free to weigh in also after Bob on this one if you'd like. So what is the best way to convince senior management to make investments in new hygienic equipment and facilities?
Well, I'll start that question to answer that question by saying this came up quite a bit in the polls that we did. People said, you know, one of the reasons why we're not doing a lot of these things with hygienic design is we just don't have the budget for it. I think Patrick alluded to this perfectly, which is it's always difficult to prove the preventative costs, because you'll do these designs, you'll make the changes, you'll make things better for sanitation, but you don't know what risks you've avoided, because hopefully you avoid them. And that's always something you have to get across. And I think, Patrick, I think you started to say this right, exactly right, is you've got to be able to say your costs are going to be higher. Even things like routine maintenance that you mentioned, which should be pretty easy to explain, but also the bigger risks of having an incident, and what's that going to cost. The one thing I will say that came out in the poll, and then I'll turn it over to Patrick for his view on this, is how do you get everybody on the same page as far as HR and senior management? I think you have to be able to explain this. It's a very difficult thing to get across, but unfortunately my answer to that is you've got to find a way to do it.
Any thoughts to add there, Patrick?
Yeah, I definitely I like the question, and yeah, so the first thing is, of course, we need to design it based on the hygienic design risk assessment outcome, and yeah, that is crucial, because we don't want a plant with all golden taps and over the top design. But if you are able to justify that because you did your risk assessment, you clearly highlighted it for yourself, what the complications are if you don't do it. I think you have your perfect evidence to say, actually, this is what I need, and otherwise we are really ending up in issues. Now, and of course, designing an oil refinery or designing a ready-to-eat facility is completely different. And yeah, investments need to be done based on that risk assessment outcome. And ultimately, it may cost, but like Bob said, you will, yeah, it will come back to you ultimately.
Okay, thanks both of you. All right, so next question I'm going to pose to Patrick, and this also goes back to a topic that you discussed in that last poll question, Patrick. So what are some of the biggest challenges that companies face when they're trying to implement hygienic design improvements in existing facilities? And, how should they be balancing food safety gains with operational and financial constraints? And I guess, while you were speaking, I had the idea in my head of, let's say a company has a piece of legacy equipment that's not necessarily, that has, pieces of it that are difficult, parts of it that are difficult to clean. And they say, well, we can't afford to replace this equipment, or a retrofit wouldn't work with our facility, so we'll just clean it better, even though it's not, hygienically designed. So, again, that's just my own personal example, but, what are some of those challenges that companies face when they're trying to improve hygienic design in their existing facilities, and how do you balance those cost pressures with the food safety gains?
Yeah, also a very relevant and very good question. So in a legacy situation, the first thing is, can I manage it by procedures and practices? And do I have the evidence that I have my risk under control by the procedures that I apply? Now, if you are, and yeah, to be honest, that is sometimes hard to prove, but it's still the starting point, I would say. Then, yeah, when you realize that that may take too much time, or you are yeah, not feeling confident that every time this is done correctly, then it becomes a matter of yeah, looking for investments. But even in a legacy facility, and doing refurbishments also is not without risks. So you really need to have a good understanding of the situation, and can we do refurbishments while not interrupting the ongoing production. Now there are, and actually the EHEDS has just almost launched a new guideline on how do we deal with refurbishments, and what kind of measures should I take to do a refurbishment, because the refurbishment in itself also need to complete a risk management approach. So I encourage you to look into that. But I also know situations where people said, actually, we are really not able to fix a plant, and we have to start from all over again. Now that's of course the worst case scenario, but it happens. Now, and that all depends, of course, on your cost estimates, your holistic view. What's the longer term vision of your facility? How do I do I have opportunities to expand or increase my production capacity, etc., etc. So it's a complex, viewpoint approach that you need to apply in those situations.
Okay, great. Thanks, Patrick. And then I have a couple of questions that are related to eHedge itself for you, Patrick. So it's kind of like a two-part question here. What are some current research gaps or emerging topics that need to be addressed in today's food safety landscape, and especially with regard to hygienic design. So that's the first part. And then the second part is, does eHedge communicate any specific research priorities or areas that you're currently focusing on?
I love this question. Okay. We as eHedge are, of course, we are very interested in new leads and trying to work with universities to look at, okay, what is the future of cleaning, robotic cleanings. We are working a lot on robotics and also hygienic design of robotics. There's also a new guideline that is under development. But there are other new leads as well, and we are actually continuously looking also of how can we better embrace some new leads in AI, and how can we further predict things better. So as an organization, we are certainly having the R in our mind, and we are looking at new leads that can improve ways of working, and can also improve our predictions. Another element that I like to mention is the sustainability aspect, because sometimes we are looking for other, let's say, leads to look at benefits of hygienic design and value creation. And although hygiene is our prime focus area, we also noticed that while applying hygienic design, we can gain on less water usage, less energy usage, less waste generation. So we are looking at more data to substantiate our general observations in this space. Next to, of course, efficiency gains and having our plants more available for operational activities rather than maintenance or cleaning. So reducing the downtime.
Okay, great. Thanks, Patrick. We'll take a couple more minutes to try to get one or two more questions in here. Let's see. So, Bob, this is going to go back to some of the topics from your presentation. So, how are the floor layout international and national standards and recommendations typically enforced? And also, what happens after a plant renovation?
Well, I can tell you what people told us, but I think I might want to see if I can pass this question on to Patrick, because he probably knows the answer better than I would.
Okay. Patrick, do you have any insight on how international and national standards for floor layouts are enforced, and after you have a plant renovation, how does that change things?
Okay, floor layouts. So let us stay on plant layout. Of course, the plant layout is a requirement to prevent cross-contamination in a food factory. So definitely this has been highlighted not only in legislation as an important aspect to think about, but it also is addressed in various food safety management programs that I highlighted in my presentation. So having a systematic approach on understanding what are my hygiene risks in my plant and how do I manage that by factory design is an important one. It has not been how do you say that? It is, you need to think about it. Let me say it like that. But it is not, let's say, pre-described what you really need to have in place. So it is something that you need to include in your risk assessment, and then you need to defend how you manage it by design or by procedures and practices.
Okay, great. Thanks for those
insights. Question.
Yeah.
You want to
add
something?
Go ahead,
I
Bob.
will add from what we Oh, okay. From what we heard in the surveys is there's any number of iterations of this. So what Patrick is saying is, as far as the consideration, all those things are certainly perfect. But what you'll see in the field though is any number. And I'll point out the one person who said their plant was 100 years old. They've clearly been through a lot of different layouts and things, but you could find most anything in the field.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Thanks, both of you. And we'll take one last question here. We'll go over a little bit on time, if that's all right with y'all. All right. So this question, I'm just going to throw it out there, and whoever would like to answer it, please do. So this is kind of a specific question, but the attendee is asking, how do you address buildup on overhead piping in the ceilings of old buildings?
Okay, Bob, shall I go ahead and then you add something on?
You take that one. Yes, you take that one.
Yeah. Now, dit is an awful situation. In an old building, ideally, yeah, you are confronted with the situation. If the pipings are exposed in the food factory environment, then the risk assessment is first, where do I have open product? Are the pipings over open product? Now, that is the worst situation that you actually do not like to see. Then you need to assess, okay, what could be the potential droppings from those overhead pipings, and how can I prevent then those droppings from getting onto my product? And then it becomes a matter of shielding or protecting your product. So there are, let's say, ways to manage that risk associated to overhead piping by shielding, but also by regular cleaning, good maintenance, and also, of course, understanding what is in the piping and what is, if there is. So doing your risk assessment, what happens if a leak occurs? Will that leak cause an issue for me, etc., etc. Hope this helps. Bob, do you like to add something?
Well, so you said a couple of things that I've heard in a number of different surveys. Is it depends upon the layout in the plant. Are the pipes or cables otherwise protected? You know, again, from being over top of product, how is the layout there? What sort of risks there are? Exactly what you said. The one thing I've heard many people say, though, is that we have a routine maintenance schedule where we go up and do the cleaning and maybe even do some swab tests to make sure that nothing's built up there. I've heard many people say that's part of their routine maintenance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good addition.
Great.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah. Insightful. Thank you both. All right, so we have arrived at the end of time. That was a great discussion. That's all the time we have for questions, unfortunately, but please join me in once again thanking Bob and Patrick for their presentation. So if you have any other additional questions or comments, don't hesitate to click that email us button on the console, and we'll share those with our presenters so that they can respond to you. And if you didn't have a chance to fill it out earlier, you'll be redirected shortly to the post-event survey. We always look forward to hearing how to make our programs work better for you. Also, please make sure to visit food-safety.com/webinars for the archive of this presentation to share with your colleagues, as well as information about our other upcoming events. So we appreciate your time, and we hope you found this webinar to be a valuable experience. Have a great day.